In a remote town plagued by frequent disappearances, a young girl is stalked by a mysterious van driver. As a survivalist, can her vigilance help her escape? Recently, a small town in Florida has seen a series of female disappearances. The perpetrator often strikes at night, abducting girls who are alone, and every time drives a distinctive white van. That evening, after school, a girl named Annie was hurrying home, constantly feeling like someone was following her. She quickened her pace, still anxious even as she reached her front door. Just as she was carefully checking her surroundings, her younger brother Tommy suddenly appeared, startling her. It seemed her earlier tension was just an overreaction. Later that night, while feeding the horses at her family's ranch, Annie noticed a white van parked along the roadside near their house. Cautiously, she approached the vehicle and warned the driver to leave, reminding him that parking on private property was not allowed. However, the van driver remained unresponsive. Annie, growing uneasy, decided to confront him, but before she could, the van's headlights suddenly switched on, seemingly as a form of intimidation. Startled by the move, Annie panicked and rushed back into the house. At that moment, Annie's mother and her sister Daisy were arguing over some trivial matters and paid no attention to what Annie was saying. Growing anxious, Annie raised her voice, but Daisy, already in a bad mood, lashed out at her instead, blaming her for being reckless and always overreacting. "Maybe the person just stopped there to take a break," Daisy said. "Why can't you be a little more tolerant? Why do you always insist on driving people away?" Annie explained that she was only trying to protect the family and had spoken up out of concern, pointing out that with the recent wave of missing girls, young women like them were prime targets for criminals. But her sister burst into laughter and mocked her, saying, "No one's going to pay attention to you. Looking like that, you're perfectly safe. Any criminal would run the other way." Humiliated by her sister's harsh sarcasm, the tension in the room hit a boiling point. Realizing that no one cared and that saying more would be pointless, Annie simply locked her door and went to bed quietly. The next morning, everything seemed normal, and Annie finally felt her nerves begin to ease. But during recess, she spotted the same white van parked near the school, instantly triggering her anxiety again. Just then, a curly-haired guy named Rocky came over to chat. Since Annie had a bit of a crush on him, they started talking, and after a few minutes of casual conversation, the van slipped from her mind. After school that afternoon, Annie walked home with her best friend Susan. The two chatted and laughed, enjoying a light-hearted moment. But unsettlingly, the white van had once again appeared, silently trailing behind them. Annie immediately grew alert and quickened her pace, quietly whispering her concern to Susan. Instead of being scared, Susan bent down, picked up a rock, and hurled it at the van. Perhaps sensing the girl's hostility, the van paused briefly, then quickly sped off. Annie tried to get a good look at the driver, but the van's windows were tinted for privacy, making it impossible to see his face. She was on edge the entire ride home. When she arrived, she was shocked to see the white van boldly parked right outside her house. Just as she was filled with confusion, a burly man in a blue uniform suddenly stepped out from inside her home. Annie was startled and tried to run, but in her panic, she tripped and fell. The man had a menacing look on his face, holding a hammer in one hand, while reaching out with the other, as if to help her up. Annie was so terrified that her legs went weak. The burly man, seeing that the girl didn't appreciate his gesture, turned and drove away. Annie, still shaken, got up from the ground. It was then that she learned from her family that the man in the work uniform was actually a repairman her father had hired. Though it seemed like just a misunderstanding, Annie's intuition told her that her recent experiences were no mere coincidence. After calming down, she began to coach her younger brother in gun practice. As a survivalist, Annie was always good at preparing for the worst. On the eve of Halloween, with her parents and older sister out for the day, only Annie and her younger brother Tommy remained at home. The two of them took out the large pumpkins they had already prepared and began working on their holiday decorations. After a while, they proudly held up the finished jack-o'-lanterns, eager to take them outside and see how they looked. But the next moment, Tommy noticed the van parked outside their front door. Annie quickly pulled her brother back inside the house. They then grabbed an air rifle and headed back out. Tommy took a shot at the van, but his aim was poor, so Annie quickly snatched the gun from him. As she fired, she steadily moved closer to the van. It wasn't until the glass of the van's window showed marks from the air rifle pellets that the driver slowly started the van and drove off. Seeing this, the siblings let out a sigh of relief. That night, Annie hid in her bedroom, enjoying some music. Through a gap in the curtains, she noticed a red dot flicker in the distance near a corner. Upon closer inspection, she realized someone was hiding in the shadows, smoking, and occasionally glancing toward her. In a panic, Annie quickly pulled the curtains shut and sat on the floor, breathing heavily. It was clear that the person was targeting her, as there was no other explanation for the constant stalking and surveillance. Thankfully, her father's return eased Annie's fears. After all, with the family together, no matter how bold the stalker was, they wouldn't dare break in. As Annie had expected, the mysterious person didn't take further action, but they hadn't given up on watching them either. While the family was gathered in the living room watching TV, Annie once again spotted the person through the gap in the curtains. Though the darkness made it hard to see clearly, the glowing tip of the cigarette in the mysterious person's hand revealed their position. Hearing Annie scream, her father hurriedly grabbed the shotgun and rushed outside. The rest of the family anxiously waited at home. When a gunshot rang out, everyone tensed up, unable to help but feel on edge. However, moments later, her father walked back in defeated. He had gone outside and circled around, but aside from shooting a pesky rat, he hadn't found anything unusual. Annie remained deeply worried, while the others relaxed, their expressions showing signs of relief. Annie wanted to share her recent experiences with her parents, but her family dismissed it as her overreacting, insisting she was just scaring herself. In reality, during this time, the white van without license plates had been frequently seen around the city and even in the outskirts. Several girls had been found dead on the streets, all of whom had disappeared after being taken when they were alone. It became clear that Annie's concerns were not without reason. The family didn't give it much attention. The next morning, Annie was too scared to go to school, so her parents asked her older sister, Daisy, to drive her. Although Daisy was reluctant, she didn't dare go against their parents' wishes. Once they arrived at school, Annie remained distracted and distant. Her best friend, Susan, reminded her that the tall guy, Rocky, had been staring at her. However, when Annie thought about the recent incidents of being watched and followed, the desire to start a relationship vanished in an instant. After school, Annie quickly locked all the doors and windows to eliminate any potential risks. She even suggested to her parents during dinner that they install stronger doors, windows, and better locks for the house. Although her parents thought she was being a bit overly anxious, they reluctantly agreed to calm her down, though they were unsure when the changes would actually happen. In the early morning, Annie was leisurely riding her horse when she saw the white van again. Filled with fear, she watched as the van suddenly started and seemed ready to chase after her at any moment. Annie suddenly jolted awake from bed. It had just been a nightmare. After waking from the dream, she found it hard to fall back asleep and faintly heard strange noises coming from downstairs. So, Annie grabbed her gun and cautiously made her way down. The door was wide open, looking as though someone had broken in, which only made her more anxious. Just then, a hand slapped her shoulder. She nervously turned around, only to find her father standing behind her. She let out a sigh of relief, grateful that it had just been a false alarm. As the end of the month arrived, it was time for the annual Halloween celebration. During this period, Annie hadn't seen that eerie van again, and she began to feel more at ease mentally. The class was preparing for the Halloween party, and everyone was looking forward to it. When her sister Daisy found out that Annie was going to the party, she unexpectedly expressed her support. Daisy even took out her long-preserved makeup collection and carefully helped Annie get ready. On Halloween day, Annie arrived at the party dressed in denim and riding her horse. While her entrance was unique, her outfit was a bit more conservative, drawing some teasing from her classmates. Annie didn't mind, as staying true to herself was what mattered most. As the lively music played, everyone sang and danced, creating a fun and upbeat atmosphere. However, good times always seem to fly by. Because their home was farther away, Annie and Susan had to leave early. As they were about to go, the boy, Rocky, came to say goodbye and kissed Annie. Before parting, he even invited her to go swimming together. Annie remained composed on the outside, but inside, she was thrilled. With a hint of reluctance, Annie and Susan made their way back home. As the sky gradually darkened, the two of them saw that same haunting white van parked by the roadside once again, as if it had been waiting for them. Annie and Susan immediately became tense, exchanging nervous glances. Without hesitation, they spurred their horses into a gallop. The white van instantly started up and began to chase after them. In order to escape, Annie and Susan had no choice but to split up and run in different directions. The van relentlessly followed Annie, who, in a desperate attempt to shake it off, turned her horse toward the pier and raced into the dense woods. Unfortunately, the horse wasn't trained well and stumbled, causing Annie to fall off. The van driver gradually slowed down, toying with his prey like a cat playing with a mouse. Annie clumsily got to her feet and, stumbling, hit herself in a nearby pit. The van driver parked the vehicle not far away and began to get out of the car to search. He approached the pit where Annie was hiding, but found nothing. Annie had used the opportunity when the van driver got out of the car to quietly slip under the vehicle, hiding in the most dangerous yet safest place. The van driver would never have suspected that the prey he was chasing was hiding right beneath his car. Using her courage and cleverness, Annie remained hidden, hoping to outwit him and escape. Having successfully avoided the danger, the van driver searched in vain and eventually left. On the other hand, after returning home, Susan immediately called Annie to check if her best friend was safe. Coincidentally, Annie's sister was on the phone with her boyfriend, and the phone was unavailable to answer. It was late at night, and Annie searched everywhere for her horse. Finally, she found it in an open area not far away. Struggling, she led the horse toward home. Once back, Annie instinctively ran to tie the horse up, only to find the van driver waiting for her in the stable. With his strong arms, he grabbed Annie by the neck and lifted her off the ground. When he saw she was almost out of breath, he threw her to the ground and then took out a rope to bind her. It was clear that the van driver seemed to have a dark sense of pleasure, enjoying tormenting his prey for amusement. In a moment of crisis, Annie looked at her restless horse beside her. A sudden suspicion crossed her mind. She remembered not long ago when she and her brother were feeding the horse in the stable. Mischievous Tommy had run behind the horse to play, almost getting kicked by its hooves. Thankfully, Annie reacted quickly, preventing a tragedy from happening. Now, the van driver had moved right behind the horse, giving Annie the chance to turn the tables. She gritted her teeth, endured the pain, and rolled to the side, shouting the horse's name. With a loud neigh, the horse reared up, its hind hooves kicking back forcefully. The van driver was caught off guard and was sent flying by the powerful kick. Taking advantage of the moment, Annie desperately ran out of the stable. Although the driver was hit hard, he wasn't fatally injured and slowly got up from the ground. Annie staggered ahead, but the driver quickly followed in her van, closing the distance. She screamed, hoping her family would hear, but unfortunately, the loud rock music blaring from the record player completely drowned out her cries for help. In the end, the driver caught up with her, knocked her unconscious, and threw her into the van. Moments later, Annie woke up from her coma. While the driver was focused on driving, she grabbed a wrench and slammed it hard onto the driver's head. Caught off guard, the driver was severely injured. Annie took the opportunity to push open the car door and stumbled her way toward home. Inside the house, Daisy was still on the phone. Annie desperately knocked on the door, which made Daisy realize what was happening. Just before the van driver could turn back, Annie finally managed to hide inside the house. The two sisters fought with all their strength to temporarily prevent the driver from breaking through the door. Afterward, they locked the door and ran to the bedroom to hide. However, the driver showed no signs of giving up, and with the rest of the family absent, the sisters had no choice but to figure out a way to block the bedroom door, praying that the driver would leave soon. They wanted to call the police for help, but the phone was in another room. Helpless, they could only use a cabinet to block the door. The two sisters acted quickly, but the driver was even faster. He used a crowbar to smash through the front door and then began breaking down the bedroom door. With nowhere to hide, the sisters had no choice but to escape through the window. Daisy was the first to crawl out, while Annie was a step slower and had her ankle grabbed by the driver. Daisy tightly gripped her sister's hand, and the two sides began to struggle. Unexpectedly, the driver deliberately eased his grip. In the moment when the two sisters used all their strength, he suddenly let go. The two girls lost their balance and fell from the roof to the ground. The driver climbed out the window and looked down with a vicious glare. Through the dim light inside the house, he could vaguely make out the van driver, a fierce-looking, middle-aged man. The two sisters fell from the height below. Though their bodies ached all over, they were fortunate to have escaped without serious injuries. Supporting each other, they hurried outside and just happened to spot the van still with its lights on. Without hesitation, they jumped into the vehicle. However, being unfamiliar with the car, they struggled to drive it smoothly. As Annie drove, she nervously kept glancing behind. Suddenly, the vehicle collided with the guardrail and came to a stop, which greatly alarmed both of them inside the car. Just as the driver was smashing the car window and reaching for Daisy, Annie quickly shifted into reverse and floored the gas pedal. The driver was forced to let go as the car broke free. However, just as they escaped, the wheels got stuck in a mud pit. In a panic, Annie quickly shifted gears again and pressed the accelerator. The van finally broke free and sped away toward the driver. The driver, unable to avoid in time, was hit head-on by the car. Annie and Daisy, still in shock from the terrifying ordeal, hadn't fully recovered when the sound of siren grew louder. It turned out that Annie's best friend, Susan, had been unable to reach her and had called the police for help. When the police arrived and investigated the vehicle, they found that the van driver had mysteriously vanished. Shortly after, based on clues from the van, the authorities discovered the bodies of several victimized girls. The infamous serial killer, known for recruiting, was still on the loose, continuing to cause murder and mayhem. And with that, the story came to a chilling end. This film, released in 2023 and directed by Yurian Skeks, is a cleverly crafted and highly creative thriller. The director intentionally avoids showing the villain directly, instead building the image of a dark, mysterious killer through subtle details and indirect clues. In this gripping suspense thriller, we follow the protagonist as they navigate between everyday life and fear, with danger lurking in unseen darkness and revealing itself during moments of vulnerability. Despite the lack of excessive bloodshed, the film still delivers a powerful shock to the audience. With such an inventive and surprising story, what are your thoughts? Feel free to leave a comment and discuss in the section below.